I am Cristiano Ronaldo. The world knows me for my achievements on the football pitch, but no one knows about the terrifying night I experienced when I was 12 years old in our house in Madeira. What I saw that night was far more frightening and real than football. And after that night, nothing was ever the same again. The story I'm about to tell you brought me to my knees. As a child, I thought I was brave. But that night I learned that courage is just an illusion until you face real terror. We lived in an old house on the hillside overlooking the sea in Funchal, Madeira, a house I could only describe as cursed. This house from the 1920s seemed as if it had been built by death itself. It had thick stone walls that guaranteed no sound that entered could ever escape. Its narrow windows looked at us like eyes when night fell, and those old wooden floors. They creaked with every step in such a horrifying way that you could feel not only us, but other beings walking in the house. Our financial situation was terrible. Even renting this house was very difficult for us. But now I think maybe the house chose us. Maybe there was a reason we had to live there. We lived in this house with my mother Dolores, my father Jose, and my sister Elma. But we soon realized that there were actually 5 of us. The 5th one, although we hadn't seen him yet, we felt his presence every moment. The house had its own terrifying atmosphere. Even when the sun filtered through the windows during the day, it seemed as if the light was absorbed and disappeared the moment it touched the walls. When evening came, the house transformed into a completely different creature. The walls closed in, the corridors narrowed, and there was no air left to breathe. Every sound echoed, but strangely, something was missing in every echo. It was as if our voices disappeared somewhere and reached other beings. At that time, my passion for football was at the level of madness. Every day I would run around with my friends on the street, and when I came home, I would play with the ball in my room. My mother constantly said, "Cristiano, don't play with the ball in the house. The neighbors are getting disturbed." But I wouldn't listen. Now I think about it, maybe it wasn't the neighbors who were disturbed, but that other resident in the house. The first signs came very subtly. Sometimes, while we were eating, we would hear light footsteps from upstairs. At first, no one paid attention. We would dismiss it saying old house. But then I realized that these sounds came exactly during our meal times, as if someone upstairs saw us eating and sat at the table too. Sometimes when we were watching television in the evening, sounds would come from upstairs as if someone was also turning on a television. But we only had one television in the house. There wasn't even electricity upstairs. The most disturbing thing was the footsteps we heard in the depths of the night. Slow, measured steps. Tick, 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 as if someone was walking very carefully trying not to wake us up. But of course, it did wake us up. And worst of all, these sounds always came from directly above my room. Before that night, whenever I heard these sounds, I always comforted myself. You're imagining things, Cristiano. It's the wind, the old house creaking. But that night, I faced reality, and reality was much more terrifying than I'd imagined. On that cold night in March, the wind from the Atlantic was shaking our house like a monster. The windows were trembling, the doors were creaking. Even nature seemed to sense that something was wrong that night. While we were sitting in the living room as a family, there was an old horror movie on television. How ironic, isn't it? My mother was sewing, but her hands were trembling. My father was reading the newspaper, but he had been turning the same page for half an hour. My sister was doing her homework, but she was dropping her pencil so often that it seemed like there was no strength left in her hands. Now I understand that we all felt something was different that night. There was an invisible tension in the house, an energy like electricity in the air. This was bad energy. When it was 9 o'clock, my mother said, "Cristiano, bedtime." Her voice was more tense than usual, as if she wanted to send me upstairs as soon as possible. I protested as usual, but the fear in my mother's eyes silenced me. That fear. It wasn't just a mother's concern for her child, it was something else. While brushing my teeth, I was looking at myself in the mirror, and at that moment, I thought I saw something else in the mirror. Behind me, a blurry shadow. I immediately turned around. There was nothing there, but my reflection in the mirror still looked as if someone was still behind me. When I put on my pajamas and went up to my room, the corridor seemed darker than usual. The shadows seemed denser, more alive. As I stepped, the wooden floor made such horrifying sounds that every creak seemed to be signaling to another being. My room was on the second floor of the house, right next to the stairs. It was a small, cramped room. There was only a bed, a small wardrobe, and my study desk. My Real Madrid and Benfica posters hung on the walls, Ronaldo and Figo posters. That night, these posters gave me no comfort. On the contrary, it was as if eyes from the posters were watching me. When I lay down on my bed, I felt much more tired than usual, but this was a strange fatigue, as if my energy was being drained by a force. I closed my eyes, but I wasn't comfortable. It was as if someone else was in the room. Just when I was about to fall into a deep sleep, that sound from above froze my blood. Tick, tick, tick. This time it was different, clearer, more deliberate, as if someone was deliberately making it creak. And strangely, the rhythm of this footstep was completely normal, walking rhythm. Very slow, very measured, as if that person was not in a hurry, as if they had all the time in the world. I opened my eyes and held my breath. The sound continued, but now I could hear it much more clearly. Not just footsteps, shoe sounds, old heavy shoes, old leather shoes that creaked with every step. And then I realized that these sounds were coming from directly above my room, regularly, walking above my bed, as if someone upstairs was lying in the same position and walking in my room. My first thought was to find logical explanations, maybe a cat, maybe wind, maybe the roof, but none of them explained these regular human-like sounds. And then I remembered, our house didn't have a third floor. The second floor was the ceiling and above was the roof. There wasn't even a staircase to go up to the roof. So who was walking upstairs? The sounds didn't stop. On the contrary, they became clearer. Now it wasn't just footsteps, it was as if someone was dragging furniture, heavy wooden furniture, creaking, scraping sounds, and sometimes as if someone was dropping something, dull sounds. I got up and opened my door slightly. I listened carefully. My family was downstairs. The television sound was still coming, so only I was hearing these sounds. Or was it only interested in me? I stood in the corridor and looked up. Of course, there was no third floor, just the ceiling. But that ceiling looked very different now, as if it was lower, more oppressive, and as if things were really moving on it. I returned to my room, but I didn't lie down on my bed. I stood and listened. The sounds continued. And then I noticed something very terrifying. These sounds were synchronized with my movements. When I stopped, the sounds stopped. When I walked, the sounds walked. When I ran, the sounds ran. This discovery literally paralyzed me. So whoever was upstairs was watching me, following my movements and imitating me. I decided to do an experiment. It took 3 steps. 3 footstep sounds came from above. I stopped. The sound from above also stopped. I jumped. A jumping sound came from above. I no longer had any doubt. Someone was upstairs, and that someone was playing with me. It was past midnight when the sounds took on a completely different character. It was no longer playful. It was aggressive. The being upstairs started running, fast, angry steps. Running, stopping, then running again, as if it had gotten angry, impatient. And then, a horrifying creaking sound came, as if doors were opening and closing upstairs, but this wasn't door creaking. It was something more terrifying, as if old rotten wood was being torn apart. At this point, I couldn't stand it anymore. I had to go downstairs. But as I went down the stairs, I noticed that just as I started moving, all sounds from upstairs had stopped. There was absolute silence, as if the being upstairs was predicting what I would do and waiting. This realization made my hair stand on end. So that being wasn't just imitating me, it was predicting me in advance. My father was still watching television in the living room, but I could see that he was also uncomfortable. His eyes were on the television, but his ears were upstairs. My mother was making tea in the kitchen, but her hands were trembling. "Dad," I said, my voice barely coming out. Upstairs. There's someone upstairs. My father took his eyes off the television and looked at me. What I saw in his eyes wasn't fear. It was acceptance. We know, he said quietly. This answer shocked me. You know, my mother called from the kitchen. Cristiano, come sit here. As I sat next to them, I felt like we were sharing a family secret. There was someone who lived in this house before, my father said. Señor Martinez. He died at age 76. He was born in this house, grew up in this house, took his last breath in this house. How did he die? I asked. Maybe I shouldn't have. My mother and father looked at each other. Then my mother spoke. He fell down the stairs at midnight while going up to the attic. Is there an attic? I asked. There used to be, my father said. A small room. There's a staircase going up there, but it's closed now. Señor Martinez used to live there. He never married, had no children. He only loved football. Football? This information surprised me very much. Yes, my mother said. When he was young, he played for the local team. There were football photos, cups everywhere in his house, especially in his room in the attic. Just then, very slow, very deliberate footsteps started coming from upstairs. This time we all heard it. My mother and father's faces changed. Is he still there now? I asked. We don't know, my father said. But sometimes sounds come as if he's still alive. While saying these words, a very different sound came from upstairs, as if someone was bouncing a ball on the ground. Ball sound, regular rhythmic ball sounds. He's dribbling, I whispered. My mother and father looked at me. What did you say? Upstairs. Someone upstairs is dribbling with a football. It really was like that. Ball sound, footstep sound, ball sound, footstep sound. It continued with a regular rhythm. At that moment, instead of fear, I felt something very strange. Curiosity. Señor Martinez was playing football, just like me. I want to go upstairs, I said. Never, my mother said. The staircase to the attic is dangerous. Señor Martinez also died by falling from there. But what I would experience in the continuation of that night was much more terrifying. Around 2 o'clock, everyone went to sleep. When I went up to my room, the sounds from upstairs started again. But this time it was very different, much closer, as if Señor Martinez had gotten very close to the ceiling. And then, tapping sounds started coming from the ceiling, as if someone was tapping the ceiling with their fingers. Tick, tick, tick. At regular intervals, tapping moving along the ceiling. I sat up in my bed and looked at the ceiling, and at that moment, I experienced the most terrifying thing of my life. At one place on the ceiling, there was what seemed to be a very slight sagging, as if someone was really walking upstairs and their weight was slightly bending the ceiling, and the sagging was coming right over my bed. My insides filled with ice. The being upstairs was coming right over me, and the ceiling was starting to sag. The tapping sound stopped. There was absolute silence, but the sagging continued, as if the being upstairs had stopped right above me and was looking at me. And then, from the very center of the ceiling, a very faint sound came, like a whisper, like breathing. Cristiano. It had said my name. The being upstairs knew my name. Cristiano, come. My voice wouldn't come out. My body was frozen, but that voice continued, come, let's play together. This time I couldn't stand it. I jumped out of bed and ran downstairs, screaming, Mom, Dad, it's talking to me. It's saying my name. My mother and father came running. This time they were very serious too. What did it say? My father asked. It said, come, let's play together. It said my name. My mother started crying. We can't stay here anymore. After that night, I could never feel comfortable in the house. Every night the sounds came, and every night it got a little closer. Señor Martinez was trying to communicate with me. Sometimes at night, I would play football in my room, and every time, the same sounds would come from upstairs. Ball sound, running sound, breathing sound, as if someone upstairs was also playing football. The most terrifying thing was that on some nights, crying sounds would come from upstairs. Very sad, very lonely crying sounds, as if Señor Martinez was very unhappy, and he needed my friendship. But I was only 12 years old, and I was at the point where fear leads to death. A week later, we decided to move. Even though our financial situation was very bad, we realized we couldn't stay in that house. On moving day, while packing our things, I experienced something very strange. When I went up to my room for the last time, I looked at the opposite building from the window. And there, at the window on the 3rd floor, an old man was standing. He was looking at me and waving his hand, as if saying goodbye. I clearly understood at that moment that the old man was Señor Martinez, because when I looked at him, a strange feeling of peace came over me. Not fear, but peace. After we moved to our new house, I started researching about Señor Martinez. What I learned from the neighbors was shocking. Señor Martinez had indeed played for the local team. He was a very talented player. But because his family was poor, he couldn't play professional football. He had dreamed of this his whole life. He never married, had no children. He lived alone in his room in the attic. On the walls were photos of football trophies, old footballs, and a jersey collection. The saddest detail was this. Before dying, he constantly told neighbors, "I wish I had a child. I would have taught him football." When I learned this information, everything fell into place. Señor Martinez had seen me as his own child. He wanted to play football with me. He wanted to teach me football. But I was scared, and I ran away. Years later, when my career was at its peak, I went back to that old house. The house was still there. I talked to the new owners and asked them to open the attic. When I went up to the attic, I couldn't control my tears. It was a small room, and it was still there. The old football, faded football photos, broken trophies. I took those items and donated them to the Madeira Football Museum. I wanted them to be exhibited under the name Señor Martinez Collection. And from that day on, I never had dreams about that old house. Señor Martinez was at peace now. His story had been told. He was remembered. Maybe that night, only the souls of 2 football lovers had met. One had passed from this world, the other was newly coming to the world. And maybe at that moment, his experience and passion had passed to me. Today, when I'm at the peak of my career, before every important match I say, "Señor Martinez, be with me today too." And strangely, I always perform better in those matches, because I'm not playing alone anymore. With me, there's another invisible player, and that player is an old man who spent his whole life with football but never got his chance. That's why I'm telling this story, because sometimes the things we fear might actually be spirits trying to help us. And if you ever experience something like this, don't run away. Listen, maybe that spirit is looking for something in you. I am Cristiano Ronaldo, and this is my real horror story. But at the same time, it's also the miracle story that made me who I am today. Every celebrity has a secret horror story. Write in the comments which celebrity story you want to hear. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching.